Kia ora everybody, it's great to be here. We've had a really productive morning, the Labor team talking about the issues facing the country, planning for the year ahead. You'll hear more from us as the year progresses around the different approaches, the different direction that we would take as an alternative government. Our focus this year will be very much getting match fit and ready for the next election campaign, which will be next year. So you'll see some new policy for us as the year progresses. You'll see our team really focused on getting into the details and preparing for government as well. And of course we know that we've got a really important responsibility as the opposition to hold the government to account for the consequences of the decisions that they are taking. And in that light I saw highlights of Christopher Luxon's State of the Nation speech today, in which he seems to have forgotten about the number one issue facing New Zealanders, which is the cost of living. It's still the biggest issue for New Zealanders. Kiwis struggling to pay their bills on a monthly basis will have seen nothing that gives them any hope from Christopher Luxon's speech today. This is a government that suddenly seems to have discovered science as the answer to the country's questions, despite the fact that 350 jobs were cut from the science sector last year under Christopher Luxon's watch, and he did nothing about it. The role of Chief Science Advisor to the Prime Minister seems to have been disestablished under Christopher Luxon, though he doesn't seem to have made any announcements about that. This is a government that's basically trying to create distraction from the fact that the economy is shrinking under their watch. If disestablishing Callaghan Innovation is the answer, was John Key wrong when he established it and said that establishing Callaghan Innovation was going to be the answer? Ultimately they're reshuffling things around. There's no additional investment, significant additional investment in science being announced today, and if they were really serious, that's the sort of thing that they would be talking about. So very happy to get into questions.
Do you think Callaghan actually did anything? Is there a reason it shouldn't be disestablished?
As I said, John Key said that establishing Callaghan was the thing that was going to turn around the fortunes of the country. Now Christopher Luxon saying that disestablishing the Callaghan Innovation Institute is going to be the thing that's going to turn around the country. They're both wrong. If we really want to get better outcomes from the science sector, we need to invest more money in science. This is a government that cut investment in science.
It was completely riddled with problems though, and that was under your watch as well. It was going to be millions of dollars of investment. I mean, how come you didn't invest?
Well, ultimately, if you want more and more, better outcomes from the science sector, you've got to invest more in the science sector. We had about $500 million in capital investment in the science sector that had been allocated. It was allocated in our last budget. One of the first things this government did was cut it.
The Prime Minister said that New Zealand slipped into a culture of saying no to too many things, and that's what's holding back economic growth. What did you make of that comment? Do you think New Zealand has that problem?
Sorry, the irony there just captured me a bit. This is a government that hung up a great big no sign over the Beehive the very first day they were in government. So it's pretty rich for them to now be saying, oh, well, we've been saying no to too many things, when basically that's all the government's had to say for the last year.
Do you think it's commercialising science?
I think we were working on quite a lot of reform in the science sector. So reorganisation of the CRIs, I think, was something that we were looking at. So some of that work actually picks up things that were in train before the last election. There is progress that can be made there, but it is going to require additional investment. And this government's doing the opposite. They're actually cutting funding for science.
Do you think personally investing scientists a bit more in the profits and proceeds of your own innovations is a fair idea?
A lot of the scientists that I've met aren't motivated by personal return. They're motivated by all the right reasons, much more altruistic reasons than that. But making sure that they have an ongoing stake in whatever comes out of their research, I think, is a potentially positive thing.
When will the public see Labor's first new idea for 2025?
You'll see some more policy from us in the coming months. I'm not going to put a particular date on it at the moment. But all of the pieces have to fit together. And so it's not just a question of chucking out policies left, right and centre. You actually have to have a coherent alternative vision for the country.
What do you make of the, just back on Luxon's speech, what did you make of the call for more mining, just in the context of New Zealand's image, green image, and also his call for more investment? How do you see those two interact?
It depends what you're mining, and it depends what you're mining it for. So mining more fossil fuels should not be part of New Zealand's future. We have an abundance of renewable energy here in New Zealand. We don't need to be mining fossil fuels to secure our energy security. We've actually got plenty of renewable energy to be able to do that. There are some areas of mining which are critical to New Zealand. If we want to build more roads, you have to mine the materials for the roads from somewhere. Those things we need a clear plan around that protects the natural environment. As I said, mining fossil fuels shouldn't be part of the future.
What does it mean to be the best prepared government? Like, what does that actually mean?
It means that when we go into the election campaign, I want to know that the promises that we're making are promises we know we can deliver on, that we've worked through the detail and we've got a credible plan to deliver them, and that ministers know what they are going to need to do in order to be able to deliver on those commitments.
Does that mean we shouldn't expect any Catholic schools?
That's a phrase that is used by the media. It's not a phrase that's used by us. Almost all of the announcements that I made in the last election campaign, including about tax, had gone through the Labor Party's policy process.
Speaking of captain schools, at the last election you were out working with Winston Peters. Would you consider working with him after the next election, or is any decision being made around that?
As I've said repeatedly last year, when we get closer to the election, I'll set out who we think we can work with and why, and who we think we can't work with and why. And I think it's unlikely our position on New Zealand First would change.
The last time you guys changed the government, you ran on the budget responsibility rules with the Greens. You're cooperating more with the Greens and Party Maori. Would formalising a budgetary kind of restriction be part of that cooperation?
Well, certainly the Labor Party will set out before the election what our fiscal objectives are, and that will include whether there are no-go zones for us, so whether there are bottom lines for us. We'll set that out well before the election. Our goal would be to get as many votes as we can, to be the biggest and most influential party in government, so that we can then deliver on those.
Would you extend an offer to those two parties to be a part of sorting out in advance those fiscal goals?
That was, in that particular case, it was done relatively close to the election, so I think that's the sort of conversation you might have closer to an election.
In terms of McPeters, how does that change from last election? I mean, were you not prepared?
I think if you look back in 2017 and our experience in 2017, some of the commitments that we made, and I've mentioned some of them, things like Kiwi Build, Auckland Light Rail and so on, we hadn't worked through the exact details of how that would be implemented, and therefore we weren't able to deliver on the commitments that we'd made. That must not happen again. I don't want that to happen again.
Do you want your policies set in stone, and what does that mean that we are going to likely see releasing those policies early, or just working on those policies way earlier than usual?
I think it's a combination of those things. It's making sure that we get external advice in our policy development, so bringing in people with that external expertise who can talk about the deliverability of the commitments that we're making. It is about making sure that we've done all of that work before the election. I would say that this current government didn't do that. If you look at the commitments that they've made and got into government and said, oh, this is all a lot more complicated and a lot harder than we thought, you're hearing a lot of that from this government at the moment. They don't use those exact words, but they say similar things. I don't want us to be in that position after the next election.
If you're not making, what feedback did Peter Hughes have for the Labor Party today?
Yeah, so I want to say first up, because I think it's important, that I respect that Peter Hughes has a lifetime commitment to the public service, and he was here in the capacity as a former public servant, so not as a Labor Party supporter. We invited him in to share his observations on how to get the best out of the public service, and that included some observations that he had from his time working, with our ministers on things that he thought that we could, do differently. And obviously, I'll respect they were his candid views, so I won't share them. But ultimately, he was doing the same thing he would do with any party, as he did with the National Party when they became government straight after the election, which is to just talk to them about this is how you actually get the best out of the public service.
And someone else that you respect is Brian Roach. He was pretty brutal about all the flaws that he saw in the public service. I mean, is Peter Hughes the best person to really get in to have a refreshed Labor Party?
As I said, he was here to share his observations on how he thought we could get the best out of the public service. I respect both Peter and Brian. I think they both bring a lot to the public service.
Just on over-promising and under-delivering, if you're not making grand promises, how do you expect people to want to vote for you when the turnout was so bad last election?
Well, he said we're not making grand promises. I haven't said anything about the promises that we're making yet. I haven't made any.
But you've said that you won't overpromise and underdeliver. You're sort of hinting at
That's right. There will certainly be some big things that we are campaigning on, but we will have worked through the detail to make sure that we can actually deliver on them.
What sort of things?
Well, you have to wait and see.
You mentioned crime.
Specific examples of where Labor could have done better?
It was a Chatham House session, so I'm not going to, share the things that he shared, because I think it's important that we protect his neutrality as a public servant as well.
But do you think Labor learnt something new from hearing from him?
I think on an individual level, I think everyone will have taken something away from the conversation.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned crime and how the New Zealanders didn't love Labor's policies on crime heading into the last election. What do you think needs to change? What will you be looking at changing this time around?
I think we will have a focus in our campaigning next time around on the causes of crime. I think New Zealanders have seen now that tough on crime rhetoric doesn't necessarily reduce crime. So I think they want to see that we're getting underneath that we're understanding what's driving increases or decreases in crime, and that we've actually got answers.
Didn't you do a massive piece of work on that with research and then reform and reforming the justice sector with Andrew Little at the helm? Why couldn't you then take that work into the election?
Yeah, I mean, I think because things change. COVID-19 changed a lot of things. We saw a lot of spikes in pressure on police post-COVID that we weren't seeing before COVID. So things change.
Have you been speaking to any former Labor leaders about just time in opposition, how to build the party back, that sort of thing?
I speak to Helen Clark from time to time, who was our most recent leader with extensive experience in opposition. She's spent 6 years as leader of the opposition, so she's had some observations that she has shared. I continue to talk to Andrew Little reasonably frequently when I run into him at different times. I haven't spoken to Phil Goff very much because he's in the UK and is now doing a public service role. But yeah, I take advice from people all the time. But not just former leaders. I talk to former politicians. I talk to former staffers.
I just ask because you do, optimism aside, you do have a hard mountain to climb this term and maybe into next term. So how are you feeling about it all, leading the party to the next election?
I described it in a recent interview, which may or may not have come out this week, as there's a difference between optimism and hope. So optimism is the idea that everything is just going to go your way and get better without you having to do anything about it. Hope is the sense that you can make things better through your own hard work. I'm a very hopeful person.
You say you've been listening for a year and a half now. What do people say about you personally as a leader?
I've had a lot of support. I think people like the fact that I'm reasonably down to earth. People like the fact that I try and answer questions. People like the fact that I'm approachable, and that's exactly what I intend to continue to be.
Has anyone come up to you and said, why are you still here?
No.
No?
Well, other than some of you from time to time, but no one else.
Can you provide some kind of tangible things that you've managed to achieve today? Still not quite sure. What did you actually do today?
The Away Caucus is not about shaping up announcements, and it's not about announceables today.
The announcements, what did you do?
Well, you'll see the detail. You'll see the product in due course.
Probably know what you actually are able to achieve, and your Labour Party supporters should want to see what.
And at such time as we've got new things to announce, you'll be the first to know.
Policy, did you make any plans? Is there anything in store for the election?
We have been talking about the policy development process and some of the ideas in the policy process, but not to the point where we're announcing anything today.
One of the government's big focuses is more foreign investment. Do you think that could have an influence on Winston Peters' ban on foreign buyers, or do you see them as separate issues?
I think the clue's in his party name. I mean, Winston Peters set up New Zealand First because he wanted New Zealand not to be sold off to international interests. He also, if you go back to 1993 or 4 or whenever it was he set up New Zealand First because he wanted to stop the neoliberal economic experiment. He now seems to be propping up New Zealand's most neoliberal government since 1991 and seems to be quite keen to hock off the country.
Do you think this could be a conflict point, or do you think he's on board?
You'd have to ask Winston Peters that.
What's your read on the court now that you've all kind of got together? What's your read on the caucus, and particularly how your message around dialing up the volume of the criticism and perhaps barking at more cars, what their level of enthusiasm is for that?
Well, I think people have got back from the holidays feeling pretty energised and resolved. We're very, very determined to make this a one-term government. We do sense that New Zealanders are ready to hear the alternatives, and we're keen to make sure that that we're giving them viable alternatives.
Is that something that they were calling on, last year, and you were saying, hey, look, let's just hold off, until we've finally finished our listening tour, and then going into this year when you can actually ramp it up, or is it
No, we set out, I mean, we sat down and we worked out a plan together after the election that did involve making sure that we spent a good amount of time last year reconnecting, and this year's more about policy development and talking about new ideas.
Education Te Pukenga will still be disestablished, but the Minister says maybe 6 of the polytechs will need to remain amalgamated. What do you make of that?
Look, Penny Simmons is just all at sea when it comes to vocational education reform. She hasn't produced a credible plan, a credible blueprint to show how she's going to do things differently. Those who are doing apprenticeships still don't know where apprenticeships sit within the system. That's a pretty big piece of the puzzle that a year into government she's still not able to answer.
They'll need another year to work out how the looks with consultants looking at all of these institutions. Is it fair, given the complexity, to take some time on this?
They went into government saying that we had got it wrong, that all of the 3 years of work that we had done on reforming the system was all wrong, that it was nice, easy answers, and they'd have it all done and dusted by Christmas 2023. We're now into 2025 and we still don't know what their answers are.
This time last year you spoke about how you will outlast, you said that you'd outlast Christopher Lux and, as prospective leaders. I mean, are you still confident in that?
Absolutely. And his speech today gave me even more confidence.
Are the jandals a part of the alternative pitch to the public?
No, it's just a hot sunny day.
It's a hot sunny day.
Yeah. This is smart and casual.
If you had to write a headline out of today's caucus retreat, what would it be?
Labor very optimistic and hopeful.
Thank
What
you.
message will you yourself and Labor be taking to Ratana tomorrow?
One of unity. I think Ratana is generally a positive day. So we're normally, it's obviously about celebrating someone's life, so it's a celebration of the prophet. But it's also an opportunity for us to talk about unity, to talk about the special relationship between the Labour Party and the Ratana Church, and all that's involved over history. There's been highs and lows in that, but it'll be a hopeful, warm, positive experience, I think.
How important is that relationship if you're looking to win back the relevant Māori seat next election?
It's been a pretty important relationship for us, for a very long time, since Michael Joseph Savage first forged the relationship on behalf of the Labour Party. So yes, it's an important relationship. It's not the only relationship that matters, but it's an important one.
And so what went wrong or what changed last time to mean that Labour was successful?
Well, as I said, we still won the party vote in all of the Māori electorates. I think there was some strategic voting that went on there. I've talked about that before. But we'll be campaigning vigorously in the Māori electorates at the next election.
And when you came in,
arguably be one of the hardest Māori seats to win in terms of the electorate, given how much of a profile Debbie Ngāti-Wapaka has and her links to those communities like Ratana. Wouldn't you agree?
I'm not going to produce seat-by-seat predictions for the Māori seats right at this point, but we're going to be competing vigorously in all of them.
will it be Adrian Burafi who competes on Labour's behalf come 2026?
We're not selecting candidates yet. So one of the things we have to do, actually, and just to be fair, is you need to know what the electorates are before you can select candidates, and there's likely to be quite a significant redrawing of boundaries before the election. So we can't begin that candidate selection process yet.
Do you have anything to say about Tariana Turia in your remarks tomorrow, given its role?
Yes, I will. I'll keep that for tomorrow rather than do that now.
Do you want to hint at what you have to say?
No, it'll be conciliatory.
I just wanted to ask, well, coming into today, you mentioned that there could be a reshuffle within your caucus happening sometime soon. Could you talk about what specific portfolios or what areas you think need some fresh energy?
No.
Will your team be the same at the end of the year? Like, will anyone leave, do you reckon?
I'm not anticipating any additional retirements this year. If people choose to not stand at the next election, that's generally a decision that gets made closer to the election. But there's likely to be a shift up in our lineup. Part of it is we will see how the new government, how the new ministers perform before we make decisions about how we might change our lineup.
So that would be promoting newer people who are performing well and demoting older people.
I wouldn't necessarily characterise it that way because I think our team is performing well as a team. But when you do these reshuffles, you acknowledge the strengths that different people bring to different roles.
On foreign investment, how do you feel about sort of the concierge kind of idea for funding foreign investment?
I actually think one of the opportunities for New Zealand is to look at how we create better investment opportunities for New Zealand investors. There's $130 odd billion worth of KiwiSaver investment funds at the moment. the vast majority of those are actually invested offshore. Let's create some opportunities for more of that to be invested in New Zealand.
KiwiSaver funds often say that just puts savers, Kiwi savers at risk, because if you're overexposed to New Zealand, then you get the New Zealand downturn, which tends to be worse than other downturns.
You could still bring a significant proportion of that investment back into New Zealand without creating that much risk. I'm not saying invest all of it in New Zealand, but I'm saying that bringing a share of that back to New Zealand would actually make a big difference.
And not just on the idea of foreign investment here, just to grow that capital here for New Zealand, is that, the idea of the concierge idea, is that?
Well, it depends what you're selling. With all of these things, it depends what you're selling. If you're using foreign direct investment to stimulate new startup industries in New Zealand, to get businesses growing, that's a good thing. If you're using it to hock off our national infrastructure, a bit more sceptical of that. Okay, thanks everyone. Cheers.